All right. So before I get into kind of the mechanics of the test, I want to first just mention, so in a couple weeks, I can't remember if I think it's the first week in October, you're going to have your what's called your dosage calc test. And the dosage calc test is a 25 question test, 25 questions, of which you can miss 2 and pass it. So you need an A on the test in order to pass. If for some reason you do not pass the test, you will have to remediate and retake the test. And if you don't pass it the second time, then they're going to withdraw you from the 110 classes and you'll have to start over again basically next semester. And then you will take one of these tests every semester. The 110 is different than the other ones. The 110 you take like week 6, week 7, but the other tests you're going to take at the beginning. It's the first thing you take. It's the very first thing that you take. There are review sessions that I hold prior to when you take the 130, the 220, 230, and 240 versions of this. But you don't need to worry about that now, but we will talk about throughout the semester, we'll talk about some of the things to prepare you for down the road. I just want to see. Okay. All right. So that's kind of the semantics. This is the breakdown of questions that you'll see. You will have some household measurement type questions, meaning converting between systems, metric and household. So a good example of that would be like going from pounds to kilograms, or going from ounces to milliliters, tablespoons and teaspoons to milliliters. That's what you consider a household conversion between household measurements and metric measurements. Then you have some metric unit conversions. So going from like milligrams to grams, micrograms to milligrams, milliliters to liters, and things like that. You'll see that the way this is, these first 8 questions are lumped in. They're kind of, well, you'll see when we go through the practice and I'll explain some of the differences, but you'll see that they kind of overlap. You'll have what are called intake output calculations. And usually for Allegheny campus, the way that works out is you will take a, we'll give you like a situation where for every amount, every certain amount of fluid loss, there's going to be a replacement volume. Then we're going to tell you what the actual fluid loss was, and then you're going to tell us what the replacement volume would be. And so you'll do some calculations based off of that. You'll have some simple, what they consider simple or one-step oral medication calculations. So those can include tablets, capsules, and suspensions type questions. Then you're going to do what are called the parenteral or parenteral medications. So those are very similar to the liquid oral medications, but they are, the way that they're administered are different. So subcutaneous or intramuscular routes. And again, those are considered one-step questions, and we'll practice those. We'll probably do a little bit more practice on those on Thursday. Then you have some reconstitution questions, and then there's some insulin dosage questions, meaning how do you mix, or what's the proper way to mix insulin, and then also reviewing a sliding scale. So we're going to see some practice on that. You should also know, and I believe it's available to you, there should be some practice quizzes or practice test questions that are on Blackboard. At least they were in previous semesters. I don't know if it's back to just being paper, but if there's practice on Blackboard, please take advantage of the practice questions. So what I want to do today is just briefly introduce some of the things to know, and then we'll dive into a little bit of practice, and then we'll get into more practice on Thursday. And again, if you if you can't be here on Thursday, just know that I will record these. I will post them up on YouTube. They are already, I did a review for Boyce last week on Thursday. And they, I already posted that on on YouTube. So you can go onto YouTube and you can watch that because the review is very similar to what I'm going to do today. At least the intro one. All right. So a couple of things that are important to know. Anytime you write down your answer, make sure you're indicating if it's milligrams, if it's tablets, if it's capsules, if it's units, if it's milliliters. Make sure you're indicating what your answers are. When we talk about in terms of the sciences, numbers have meaning, so they have values associated with them. So in science, if you say, I need 5, what? I need 5 ounces. I need 5 milliliters. I need 5 milligrams. I need 5 tablets. What do you need 5 of? Make sure you can properly label that and put that in. With zeros, you have you have rules associated where you put your zeros. It's important to make sure that you don't use leading zeros when they're not necessary and lagging zeros when they're not, or trailing zeros when they're not necessary. You would use a leading zero when you're dealing with things that are less than 1. So if I have, let's say it's 0.5 milliliters or 0.5 milligrams, you would write that correctly as 0.5 or 0.25 or 0.32, and it could be milligrams, milliliters. Make sure you have a 0 if it's a number less than 1. If it's a number greater than 1, or even a number less than 1, we don't need to add trailing zeros. Okay, so going back to this example, the 0.5 milliliters, it's not 0.50 milliliters. What you're trying to eliminate is the potential that if somebody were reading your handwriting or reading even the typed up like what you administered, they want to make sure it was the 0.5 milliliters and not 50 milliliters. I know it might seem silly, but that's one of the reasons. So you're trying to follow some rules that will help to eliminate guesswork as far as whether or not you administered the correct amount of medication. All right, rounding rules. Now, these rounding rules are specific for when we're doing calculations in which it says you are ordered to administer blah, how much would you give? That's where rounding rules come into play. And you'll see this in a moment when we talk about your basic unit conversions, so metric system conversions. You do not round basic unit conversions, going from, like when we're within the metric system, going from milligrams to grams, micrograms to milligrams, milliliters to liters, and then vice versa. You do not round those numbers. So if you get an answer that is 0.375, that is your answer. Do not round that to 0.4, 0.38. The only time you would round that number to a different number is if you were dealing with something like you were ordered some medication, it's available as this, how much would you administer? Then you would do some rounding. The other thing is you would round if you're going from the household units to the metric system. So like if you go from pounds to kilograms, or if you go from ounces to milliliters, then you can round if it's necessary. And we'll go through some examples. So there's 2 general rounding rules particularly for volumes, but this could also apply for milligrams as well. So if you have a volume greater than 1 milliliter, you're going to round to the nearest 10th. Okay, so the example is 1.25 milliliters. You're going to round that. You're going to look at the 5 and you're going to round that to 1.3. Okay, you're going to round up. So if it's 5 and above, give it a shove. If it's 4 below, let it go. If you have 1.24, then you're going to leave it at 1.2. Okay. If you have a volume that's less than 1 milliliter, we need a little bit more information than to the tenths. Sometimes your final answer will just be 0.5, and that's all you can write. But if you get an answer that's like 0.969, then you're going to go ahead and round that to not the nearest tenth, but you're going to round it to the nearest hundredth place. So you have two significant digits there, 0.97, and then if it's 0.963, again, we're looking at that last number. You would round that up to 0, or you'd leave it at 0.96 if the number is 4 or less in the thousandths place. It's hard to say that word. When we come across this, some questions will require you to understand and utilize military time. You'll see that a little bit more in the coming semesters, not so much this one. But what that means is, if you're not familiar, like midnight in military time is 0, 0, 0, 0. Okay. And then 1 a.m. is 0, 100. And then 2 a.m. is 0, 200. And then it goes all the way up. So 300, 400, 500, 600, 700, 800, 900, 1000, 1100, and then 1200. Now we're at noon. And then we and then we keep counting. Then we go to 1300 for 1 p.m., 1400 for 2 p.m., all the way up to 2300, which is 11 p.m. And then we start the cycle over at 0, which is 12 a.m. So it's a 24-hour time versus a 12-hour time. And so you might see some questions, probably more so on your ATI than you'll see on your 110 test, but just wanted to give you a heads up about that. And then we'll also address this at some point. Sometimes the medications that you're administering, and you'll see this again more in ATI, sometimes it depends on the syringe that's available. That will ultimately depend, or that will be the ultimate determination of how far you can round something. Because if you have a syringe that's measured down into the thousandths place, then you potentially could round down to that low of a number. So you could have, your answer could be something like 0.125, and you can mark that on a syringe. I will say, like I said, I've been doing this since 2008. I have not seen that as an answer choice, and because that does contradict the rounding rules. So I wouldn't anticipate seeing that, but at some point clinically, you're going to see where they can measure, down even to the micro units. And so just keep that in mind. All right, so let's look at some practice questions here. Actually, before we do that, sorry. That's right. I wanted to go through this real quick. Yeah, so so the practice questions and everything is posted on Blackboard for your 110 general site. It's in there's a dosage calc review. It's also in the announcements, and there is a link to the Microsoft OneDrive folder, and that's where you'll find all the practice questions. So, but it is on Blackboard, the 110 Blackboard. All right. So a couple things to keep in mind, just as you're starting to practice some of these things. Yes, the PDFs, everything's already uploaded. Everything I'm showing you is already available, and it's on, you can just click the link on Blackboard and get whatever you want. It's in when you click on the folder, go to Allegheny and then 110, and everything's there. You're welcome. Yeah, and I'm sorry if you didn't know that already. That was posted a couple weeks ago, so I know that you got a lot on your mind, so you may not remember that it's there. The important thing is that you're here, but it is available on Blackboard. I've been there. I understand. You guys have a lot on your plate, so remembering your name is probably more important than remembering your link to the OneDrive folder. So I just want you to know that it is available. If you're having difficulty finding that, I will post in the chat my email, and you can always email me too if you're having difficulty finding the link, and I will forward it to you, and then please disseminate it amongst your peers because it's there for you to utilize and learn from. All right, so a couple things, and I do like to go through some of this stuff before we actually get into the meat of practice. So this is just kind of introductory stuff. We'll get into more of the meat and the practice next time. But if I don't do some of this stuff, these are the questions that tend to come up, or the kind of like the routine questions of how do you do this or what's going on. And so this is these are important. So the title of this is called the Dosage Calc Review Intro. This should have been given to you in a packet. If it wasn't, it is on the OneDrive site for your convenience. And then I'm getting ready to answer that question. So a couple things. You want to make sure, first and foremost, read the question. A lot of times these things get missed because you answered in milliliters, but it was asking for teaspoons. If it's asking you how many to administer per dose or per day, make sure you're paying attention and reading what the question is asking. Sometimes you won't need to use all the information to solve a particular example. So a good example is, and you'll see this, and we'll talk more about this as we go along, is you'll have a label that'll say that there's 60 tablets in the bottle. It'll say that the strength is 325 milligrams. It'll give you an order of, and in this example I gave you is 650 milligrams, and then it'll say how much to administer. You would not need to worry about the 60 tablets when you're doing your math. You would just need to know that each one is 325, the order is 650, so you just take the 650 divided by 325 and get 2 tablets. If I'm moving too fast, just know we're going to go over this over and over and over again. Okay. And someone can respond to the chat where to find that on Blackboard, or you now know you can email me too. All right. So answers must be correctly labeled, meaning if you have a number, and I already talked about this, right? If it's five what? Teaspoons, milligrams. What is it? Okay. When necessary, use military time. And then for reconstitutions, we'll talk a little bit about this, and I'll even show you some variations of this that are different than what you're going to see on your test. So to answer, I think it was Ryan's question, you do need to know your basic unit conversions. You need to know what these are, and they will not be given to you on the test. You need to know that 1 gram is 1,000 milligrams. You need to know that 1 milligram is 1,000 micrograms, sometimes abbreviated MCG, I'd say most of the time. And then occasionally, and you'll see it on drug labels, it'll be labeled what looks like a U. It's actually the Greek letter mu. So it's kind of like a funky M or a fancy, cursive U, but it indicates micro. 1 liter is 1,000 milliliters. 1 kilogram is 2.2 pounds. 1 teaspoon is 5 ml. I apologize. I usually like to blow this up. 1 kilogram is 2.2 pounds. A teaspoon is 5 milliliters. A tablespoon is 15 milliliters. An ounce is 30 milliliters, and an hour is 60 minutes. You need to know these off the top of your head when you're doing these questions, because they won't be given to you. And so ultimately, it just comes down to practice, practice, practice. And you'll notice that there's not a lot here. It's not like we're asking you to remember, inches to centimeters, because we really don't have questions about that. If you're at one of the other campuses, sometimes they need to know cups and pints and quarts. And then you don't even have to worry about that for at least this campus right now. But it's important to know these here. And so you want to practice these. You want to write these out while you're practicing. It's a good practice to just write out the ones you need to know. And then just that way they're there. And then, and if you do that enough times, when you get set up on your test, you could just write out your conversions, and then they're right there, but they won't be provided to you. We already discussed rounding rules, so I don't need to go through that again. Oh, so there's a couple things here. So rounding should occur after all calculations have been completed. The exception is rounding your answer to the conversion of pounds to kilograms. When you get into second, third, and fourth semester, you're going to do what are called more weight-based calculations, where you need to know the patient's weight in kilograms, and then you're going to multiply by the whatever the milligrams per kilogram body weight, whatever that is, and we can go through some examples of that. And if you leave your number as like a long decimal number and wait until the end, it just becomes sometimes challenging to keep your work organized. You can, if you're putting it all into your calculator and you set everything up right, it won't be a problem, but you can round to the nearest 10th when you're doing weight-based calculations. That's usually not a problem. You'll hear me repeat this in the coming, or probably on Thursday. Typically, a tablet is scored and a half tablet can be used, which means you can give someone half a tablet. You cannot give somebody half a capsule. You don't need to worry about drops just yet. That'll be next semester, but you can't give partial drops. And then this is something I already mentioned. Do not round basic conversion. So if I'm going from milligrams to micrograms, whatever that answer is, write that answer. Do not round it. So, well, a lot of times when you're coming up, so the question was, you could potentially yield different answers. If you're talking about somebody who's 94 point blah, 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 blah kilograms, that those few extra decimals are not going to make much of a difference in your final outcome because you're still rounding to at the very end. So, my recommendation is that you round to the nearest 10th first and then do the remaining calculations, because that's usually how the keys are produced. However, as long as you're showing your work, I think you can legitimately argue if it was like, if you said your final answer was like 10.2 milliliters and they said it was 10.1 milliliters, I think you can argue that point if you needed to, but it probably won't be a problem. So I should say it shouldn't be a problem, especially for things like that. Good question. All right, some helpful equations. Most of you will be introduced to and utilize what's called desired over have or ordered over have. I think that should say ordered over have. I know it says desired, but order is probably the better term. Order is usually what's ordered. So the physician will order 500 milligrams Valium, 200 milligrams amoxicillin. They're going to order something, and then you need to compare it to what you have on hand. And so you typically have, or what's available, and then multiply by the quantity. So like an example for capsules might be, you have the order is 500 milligrams, the available is 250 milligrams, and then your quantity is 1 capsule, and then you get an answer of 2 capsules. Notice that there's a unit associated with that number. It's not just 2. If we're talking about a suspension, it's, again, the order is 500 milligrams. You have available 250 milligrams per 5 ml. So your quantity is 5 ml, and then that's where you get your 10 milliliters. And again, we're going to go through practice questions on these. I just wanted to kind of introduce you to some of this stuff, just so you know. Then you have some things. We'll talk more about this for next semester, your flow rate questions, but volume over time is how you calculate flow rate. We'll talk about drop rate later on, but this is more for second and third and fourth semester drop rates. This is for your fluid intake and output. And so what I did is I put together this formula that should be helpful for you. And what you do is you take your, and this will make more sense, and you'll hear me reference this in the coming weeks, is you'll take your actual output, so what the patient actually peed out or voided, times the replacement volume, and then divide it by, it says original fluid out, or you can say the theoretical or the hypothetical fluid out, and that will give you your replacement volume. So this is an equation that I came up with just to kind of simplify this concept. If you do it another way and get to the same answer, we're all doing the same stuff. It won't be a problem. And I'll show you how to do some of that stuff. And then last but not least, and you'll see me do this ad nauseum, is dimensional analysis. If you utilize, or I should say it's my belief that if you can master utilizing dimensional analysis, and it doesn't take long to master it, it's just practice. If you can get really good at doing dimensional analysis, you don't need to worry about equations and formulas, because you can just figure out using dimensional analysis how to get to the answer that you're looking for. And for some of you that are going like, I remember doing that in chemistry and I hated it, or I don't know how to do that, I'm going to show you how to do it. I'm going to do basically a variety of, or show you a variety of ways to solve the problem, because I also know that not everyone does the reviews or does the math the same way that I do. And if I just tell you, like, just do it in your head, you know, that may or may not be helpful for you. And so I wanted to give you some strategies to solve these types of questions. And then the last thing, if you need some textbook resources, these might be available at the library, but these are some of the resources that I've utilized. There's also YouTube videos for dosage calculations. Some of them are mine. Some of them are the nursing tutor RN. That can be helpful. So there's a variety of practice that's available for you. All right. Let's see here. So these are some of the practice questions, and I just want to go over just a couple, and then yes, yeah. So somebody asked if we'll be covering different topics. Yes, because I'm not covering everything today. I'm not even going to get into much of these practice questions. I just wanted to kind of introduce the material, and then you can always reference it later on. All right. So I want to go through just a couple practice questions. I'm pretty much just going to do these two, and then I think we'll call it a day for today. So let me blow these up so you can see. So we have two questions, and I'm going to turn on my camera and I'll work them out, and I'll show you how I would set these up. So we have 1,500 milligrams, and we want to know how many grams that is. And then we also have 250 micrograms, and I want to know how many milligrams that is. And I'm going to show you the variety of ways in which to answer that. So you should be able to highlight my screen so you can kind of blow it up. When you watch this back on the recording, you will see my full screen of my pen and paper here, or my marker and paper. So let's start off with this. The first thing, in order to answer this question, is you need to know what your conversion is. And so we just talked about that. 1 gram is equal to 1,000 milligrams. For this, I need to know my conversion as well. 1 milligram is equal to 1,000 micrograms. So again, you'll practice that, and then you'll have a better idea of what those are. All right. Next thing. So if I'm going to solve this using dimensional analysis, this is how I would do it. I would start off with the 1,500 milligrams. I would put it over 1. You don't have to do it that way, but sometimes it just helps to make it look more organized. So the secret to dimensional analysis is just going from one unit to another unit. And the question is, I want to go from milligrams to grams. Do I know how to go from milligrams to grams? Yes, I do. So that's what this conversion is. So before I write any numbers, I'm just going to write out milligrams to grams. It's supposed to be a G. Let's write that a little better. So what is my conversion? 1 gram is equal to 1,000 milligrams. Then I'm going to take my calculator, 1,500 divided by 1,000, and I'm going to get 1.5 grams. Now, some of you were probably thinking, well, can I just move my decimal? Yes, move it 3 to the left, and you will have your answer of 1.5 grams. How many of you have ever did the moving decimal thing and moved it 3 to the right instead? And you got some really big number that doesn't make sense. This helps to eliminate that, making that mistake. Okay. So if you ever get hung up on doing this, just know that that is, it's a common mistake. If, like me personally, that's what I do. I move it 3 to the left. I know which way it needs to go. I've been doing this for years, and so I know which way to go. But if you want some assurity, just make sure you write out. If you don't like this, you can also set this up the same way, like the ordered over have. And that will give you the same answer. You can still set it up that way. You just need to know, make sure you're confident and know when you multiply and when you divide by 1,000. And I'll give you an example of that probably the next time we get together. Then we have this situation here. So 250 micrograms. I'm going to set it up the same way. I don't want micrograms. I do want milligrams. 1 milligram is equal to 1,000 micrograms. So I'm dividing again, right? And when I do that, I'm going to get an answer of 0.25 milligrams. And all I did was do 250 divided by 1,000. Or if you move the decimal point over 1, 2, 3, you drop the lagging 0, the trailing 0, and then your answer is 0.25. And that is correct. Yeah. So you do not round these things. So if I get an answer of 0.375 milligrams, that's your answer. Do not round the 0.375 milligrams. That's your answer. All right. So that's going to be a good place to stop for today. I want to, if you can't find it on Blackboard, email me, and then I'll give you the link directly. But it is posted on Blackboard in the announcements, and it should be in the Dosage Calc review, like workshop section. And then just message me, and I'll make sure, or you won't have to message me because the links will be there. For some reason, something's not working, just let me know. And yes, every workshop will just be a little bit different. I plan to review different topics and then keep it kind of short and sweet, post them up on YouTube, and then go from there. The last 2 will probably just be a review of everything that we've seen. So, all right, hold on. Let me just read this real quick. Sorry. Yeah, as I mentioned before, they'll be posted on YouTube as well as on I'll send the link for Zoom, and they're usually posted within a few days of when they're done. Yeah, so yeah, that should help out the night students. And I'm also going to try, like I said, and do like a Thursday session as well. So, all right, are there any other questions? All right. Well, like I said, I'll be here again on Thursday, and we will reconvene then. And and in between now and then, just make sure you download and start practicing. You're welcome. I'll see you next time. Yeah, the schedule is posted on Blackboard. So this week, Tuesday and Thursday, next week, only one of the 2 days, the week after, only one of the 2 days, and then the week before your tests, Tuesdays and Thursdays. I will post on Blackboard if and when I'm doing a Friday review. So no Friday is set up as of yet.